I still remember having conscious thoughts about proving everybody wrong. I'm going to be, even though I lost my mother, I can still be successful. Like that was the kind of things I was thinking about as a young person. And I guess, to some extent still do today. And it's one of the things, frankly, I have children who, I'm happily married for 25 years, 3 kids, nice neighborhood, nice cars, nice girlfriends and boys. They basically have everything. And I've often wondered, where are they going to get their drive from, Bishoy? Where do the kids? My dad used to say that there was 2 kinds of people who respected the world: people that come from nothing and make something of themselves, and people that come from everything and make something of themselves. And the older I get, the more the second part of that makes sense to me, because I see so many people that have been given so many advantages, and they just piss them away. Like it's so easy to do. In some ways, I think it's easier to not be given much and to be successful than it is to be given all this stuff and still be successful.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I very much appreciate it. If you haven't already, check out the show notes. I have discount codes if you want to pick up a copy of Mile 40 or Break Barriers. If you're watching on YouTube, forgive me for the room, setting up this new office. It'll get a little bit more decorated in the coming days. Also, please be sure to check out Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. Please hit subscribe, follow. It helps us grow the show, and it's greatly appreciated. Today's guest is Brian Beckcom. Brian is a computer scientist, philosopher, and trial lawyer based in Houston. He has been voted a Texas super lawyer 14 consecutive times, every single year that he's been eligible. Brian also hosts a podcast of his own. It's called Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. It's a popular podcast featuring military leaders, sports stars, New York Times best-selling authors, scientists, and more. Brian's a former Division I athlete at Texas A&M. He played basketball over there. He's currently a purple belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, a single-digit golfer, and then an accomplished fly fisherman. Brian, thank you for joining me today.
Great to be here, Bishoy. Thanks for having me, man.
You got it, man. I'm really grateful that you took the time out for me. I'm also great that you've made space for the Mile 40 podcast, because just in, looking at your bio at the highest level, I could tell that you've got an interesting background. I'm sure a lot of listeners just heard me share that bio and are thinking to themselves, how is he doing all these things at once? And also, your background when it comes to philosophy and trial law in particular, something I'm personally interested in and want to dive into today. So, first and foremost, thank you. But let's get things started off a little bit and tell me, what did I miss in that bio, or did that cover everything?
You covered a lot, but probably we were talking right before the show started, and you got me thinking about, you said a lot of the guests that you feature on the show have overcome some difficult things in your life. And that kind of primed my brain to start thinking about some of the things in my life that have either been traumatic or that were difficult at the time. I didn't think I could overcome them, didn't know, which way that would go. And so one of the things you missed, the point I'm getting to is I'm a military brat. I grew up my father was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, flew 200 combat missions over Vietnam, including the very last one, won the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the second highest honor an airman can receive. My mother was an Air Force nurse. My uncle was a chief master sergeant. My older brother was a Marine. My grandfather was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I was in the Corps, something called the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M. And for those people that don't know what that is, think of the military academies, only harder and better. And my brother was also in the Corps of Cadets. My oldest son is now in the Corps of Cadets, and my youngest son will be next year. So my worldview has been shaped in large part by something of being a military brat. And what I mean by that is a lot of people think about that and they think, well, that probably means you're disciplined. That probably means you get up at 5:30 and go running every morning. there's certain connotations to being a military brat, and I do not get up early in the morning, and I don't consider myself that disciplined. But what I do think growing up in that kind of environment, what it gave me was, and particularly my father, gave me a set of really fundamental principles or values or whatever you want to call them that I've kind of run my life by. I'm 51 years old now. And so that is the frame through which I view just about everything, number one. And number two, the thing that kind of defines everything about my life, I think you can learn almost everything you need to know about me by just knowing that when I was 5 years old and my brother was 3 years old, my mother was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And I watched her fight a battle with breast cancer for 5 years, and it was absolutely brutal, like beyond brutal. Growing facial hair, losing both breasts, but basically becoming, asexual because of all the different hormones and all that stuff. It was really bad. But what I saw, more importantly, was how my dad handled that and how he handled the aftermath of that and how he raised my brother and I as a single father. And that kind of set me both consciously and subconsciously on the journey I'm on today. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But everything that, like, I think everybody has things in their life, especially when they're younger, that shape the way their brain works. It shapes their perspective on everything. And that's it for me. And so, like, for example, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple nights ago who's raising three boys by himself. And I was having drinks with him the past week, and I told him, I said, I just want to let you know how much I respect what you're doing, how important that is. And he was really, that made him feel really, really, he said, I'm so glad you said that. And I said, well, that means a lot to me given, or what you're doing for your boys means a lot to me because of what my dad did for me. So that's kind of the launching point for everything I've done, I think.
Wow, thank you for sharing that and for opening up about that. I think you really you stated it in a way that is the perfect way to kick off this episode, because it was, I guess, the foundation for you, and I think everything that kind of came thereafter, and kind of laid out the groundwork. I want to dive a little bit deeper into both of these things, both the fact that you're a military brat and your experience with your mother. You're actually not the first military brat that's come on this show. And I didn't ask the first one about this, but can you give us some background here into why you guys are called military brats? What is the brat military brat?
Yeah, so, and it sounds a little pejorative. It's not pejorative, but basically, if you grow up in a military family, the chances are very good that you're not going to live in the same place very long. So, military brats, that term or phrase typically indicates somebody that's moved around a lot. So, I was born in Louisiana, Barksdale Air Force Base, Bossier City. And then I lived in Plattsburgh Air Force Base. I lived in Kansas. I lived on the Guam Islands. I lived in Fort Worth, and this was all by the time I was 12 years old. And one of the beautiful things about the military and my dad is, you hear a lot of talk nowadays, especially in colleges, about diversity and equity and inclusion. Most of those people don't know the first thing about diversity and equity and inclusion. It's all words and books to them. They hang around with the same people. People in these DI offices, they all hang around with the same people every day. They haven't gotten the experience that people and organizations like the military or sports have gotten, and that is real diversity, real equity, and real inclusion. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Back when I was a military brat, when you went to church on Sunday, there was two services. There was the Catholic service and the Protestant service, and then there was also another Jewish service. But the Protestant services weren't divided up into Methodist and Southern Baptists and Episcopalians and all that. You just walk in and every single Protestant on the base would be there. So I got to watch these black gospel choirs sing, which was absolutely unbelievable. I got to hang out with Air Force generals and airmen and enlisted people. And I got to meet people from all over the world. And the great thing about the military is, and this doesn't just apply to the military, this applies to things like sports or maybe if you're a law enforcement officer or something like that, but you all have a similar mission. You're all fighting for a similar mission. And so what does it, and it's also hard. And so what does that do when you got people that are doing something hard and people that are aiming towards a single mission? That makes you grow very close. Like you form friendship bonds that are much deeper than some of the superficial friendship bonds you might form somewhere else. So, and the other thing it helps you do, Bishoy, is it helps you, or at least to help me, make new friends fairly easily. I mean, when you're a young kid moving around every 2 years, it kind of stinks because, you know, you have my best friend in Kansas when I was in third grade was Chris White, and I had to move 2 years after he was my best friend. But I made new friends, and it's kind of cool because, you know, at the time when you're young, it's kind of, man, this stinks. But now that I'm older, I look back and I got friends all over the world from all walks of life.
That perspective is really special and insightful. Um, Let me ask you this question. How would you compare that element of military bonding to the psychological concept of trauma bonding? Is there any correlation there in the sense that you guys are not, it's a different kind of hole, obviously, but it's a hole of sorts, right, that you need to dig yourself out of, and that hole is, will I find community here? Will I, navigate the obstacles put in front of me? Will I make it through, whatever the institution has me going through? Is there a similarity there, a correlation there? And is that what is bonding you together? Or is it more so, um, the more higher level, relationship aspect things that bring you together?
I think in the military, I hear where you're coming from, and I think there's some truth to that. But I think in the military, the primary thing that bonds people together is a sense of shared mission. Like you have a sense that everybody is wants the same thing, and you know, contrast that, Bishoy. You've been in business, you know how this works. Not everybody wants the same thing. Like you know, if I'm doing a business deal with you, it's there's certainly no guarantee, especially in a capitalist system, that I have your best interest at heart or that even have your interest at heart at all. Whereas in the military, I say it's a lot of military people don't like to hear this, but I say it's the biggest socialist organization in the entire United States. And what do I mean by that? You give up the ability to make more money than all your peers. Like if I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, I know how much you're making if you're a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And you give up some autonomy. You give up a little autonomy in exchange for something that you think is more valuable, which in the case of the military is the protection of the United States of America, fundamentally. So I think that sense of shared mission is what joins people together. But you hit on something with the bonding of people that have been through trauma. I think anytime anyone goes through something difficult with other people, it draws you closer together. And I'll bet most of your listeners, if they think about who their best friends are in life, it's people that they've been through similar struggles with. For me, that's, you know, people that I was in the Corps of Cadets with, people that I trained jiu-jitsu with. We're all going through hard stuff, and those are the people that I'm closest to. So,
Makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I was getting at, and I'm glad that you called that out. About your comment comparing it to the business world. In the business world, one of the key understandings is that, you know, even the higher ups don't necessarily have it figured out, right? Like they are figuring it out as they go. I've heard a lot of people talk about the fact that, they spent a good portion of their career working to get into upper management, only to finally get into upper management, look around and realize these people who they thought were so smart are not necessarily that much smarter than them. And in some cases, not smarter than them at all. And I think, on the outside, for someone who has no military background, or who has no background, in that realm, you like to presume that the people who are in that world do have it figured out, especially the higher up that you go up the ranks. Like, the people who are making wartime decisions, the people who are making, critical decisions for the safety of our nation, and making decisions abroad. Can you speak to that a little bit with regards to maybe how that differentiates? Because again, like if I'm just entering the military world, I'm putting a lot of trust in the people, not just side by side with me, but also the people above me. And I think, in the business world, that's really scary when you're putting trust in the people above you because you don't really know, to your point, if they have your best interest at heart. How does that work in the military world?
It's a great question, and it's a little bit of a paradox for me. So when I started as a lawyer, I started at a huge law firm. I made really good grades in law school. Had kind of my pick of jobs. I have no lawyers in the family, as far as I know, anywhere on either side, all the way back 10 generations. I'm the first one. So, when I went to law school, I was like, oh, I made good grades. I get to go to a big law firm, make $150,000 a year as a 25-year-old first year student, work 2,500 hours a year. That was what you were supposed to do. And so that's what I did. And fairly quickly, I hope this doesn't sound the wrong way, but within, 6 to 8 months, I started looking around and I was like, I think I'm better than a lot of these lawyers. Like, why am I taking orders from these guys? I think I'm more capable. I think I can do this. And, you got to be, you got to be a little cautious about that when you're young, because that's a really good way to make mistakes quickly. But I think it's a little bit of a dilemma. So I think the question is, what do you do if you get in the military and say you're a second lieutenant, which is typically the lowest rank for an officer, and the general above you doesn't know what they're doing? I mean, that's tough. And I'll tell you what I found out, Bashoy. So, for example, when I was in the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, when you're a freshman, they call you a fish, and you're disciplined by the sophomores. Okay, this is how it works in a lot of these military institutions. And oftentimes the sophomores that were disciplining me, I could run faster. I had better grades. I was smarter. I was tougher. I just felt like I was more personable. I just felt like I knew a lot more than them. But you know what? I learned far more from the bad leaders that I've had than I have from the good leaders. And I'll give you another good example of that. I left this big law firm that I was working for, and I went to work for a small law firm. And there were two partners at the small law firm. One is a fantastic, nice gentleman, and the other one is the biggest butthole I've ever met in my life. He's a very successful lawyer, but he's just not a good person. And I don't know any other way to say that. But it was what a valuable lesson it was. What a valuable lesson it was, because I got to see this person who had a super nice house in the nicest part of Houston and had a brand new Maybach every 6 months and had four other houses and through private jets. And he was totally miserable. He had everything that I thought I wanted in law school. He was rich. He had a good looking wife. He had a family. He had everything, every little possession you wanted. And he was miserable. And what it taught me very early on was chasing those sorts of things. And same thing in the military, chasing accolades, chasing ribbons. It's all in the end, nonsense. And particularly as you start to get older, you realize that literally nobody cares what you do for yourself. Nobody will sit there when you're at your funeral and say, I love the fact that Brian bought himself a very nice car when he was 30. I love the fact that Brian got to ride on private jets. Nobody cares about that. You know what they care about? You know what people care about is what you do for other people. And so the point of it is, I get back to your original question. Your original question, I think, was, what do you do if you have people in the military or anywhere else that are your bosses, and for whatever reason are not very good bosses? And I think the answer to that question is you learn from them. Yeah, and you learn far more than you learn from the bad people. And I've learned way more lessons, Bashoy, from bad leaders than I have from good leaders.
Thank you. Thank you for walking us through that and helping us get an understanding there, and really for painting a picture for us. Because it's funny, but before you and I hit record, uh, this is not where I thought the conversation was going to go, and this is one of the beauties of having a podcast like this. Uh, you got my mind running right now, and I want to ask you so many questions. Um, but I want to keep us on track here, so the people can get to know you a little bit more. And so, we talk about that aspect of your life, and clearly that was a very foundational piece of your upbringing. I want to circle back now to your mother, her journey. How old was she when you sorry, how old were you when she passed away?
I was 10.
So you were 10 when she passed away. Um, and, again, we've had many people come on this podcast who've experienced the death of parents, some of them at younger ages, and every single one of them, I guess, kind of had a different way of coping with it. Can you speak to us with regards to how you personally coped with it? Given that it was you, your brother, and your father.
Lots of nicotine.
Fair? Not fair.
Seriously, I've been addicted to nicotine since I was about 15 years old, and I think that's one of the reasons. I've actually thought about doing some things that we can talk about. If I don't know if it's appropriate for your show or not to get off of that, but I've thought about doing some psychedelics under a controlled therapeutic setting because I truly believe, sure, and I don't want I don't want to overanalyze this too much, but
No, go as deep as you'd like.
when you lose your mother, there are certain psychologists that think that you develop a certain sorts of addiction or fixations. And so I think I developed a little bit of an oral fixation. I used chewing tobacco. Plus, I'm in Texas, and I went to Texas A&M, and that's kind of. But I got, I think the first thing I did was I got addicted to nicotine. But in seriousness, the second thing I did, and if you look throughout history, you'll find oftentimes that people like Winston Churchill or whoever you want to name, like a lot of very famous, powerful people have had they've either lost a parent when they were young or they had a very weird relationship when they were young. And what the loss of my mother did from a positive perspective was that's what's driven me throughout my entire life to work hard and succeed is this notion that I had this notion that oh, somebody that was raised by a single father is just not going to be as successful as somebody that was raised by two parents. And I wanted to prove everybody wrong, mainly because I wanted to show everybody what a great guy my dad was, but also because that's what drove me. And so, from a positive perspective, I think when you suffer a traumatic event, as a young person, first of all, there's no way that that's not going to have an impact on you basically for the rest of your life. It will have some impact on you, positive or negative. Oftentimes it's negative, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, things like that. But oftentimes that's your juice. Like that's what motivates you. I mean, I still remember having conscious thoughts about proving everybody wrong. I'm going to be, even though I lost my mother, I can still be successful. Like that was the kind of things I was thinking about as a young person, and I guess to some extent still do today. And it's one of the things, frankly, I have children who I'm happily married for 25 years, 3 kids, nice neighborhood, nice cars, nice girlfriends or boy. They basically have everything. And I've often wondered where are they going to get their drive from, Bishoy? Where do the kids? My dad used to say that there was two kinds of people who respected the world: people that come from nothing and make something of themselves, and people that come from everything and make something of themselves. And the older I get, the more the second part of that makes sense to me, because I see so many people that have been given so many advantages and they just piss them away. Like it's so easy to do. In some ways, I think it's easier to not be given much and to be successful than it is to be given all this stuff and still be successful.
If you know me, you know that I like to look good and feel good. As an endurance athlete who trains daily, I need my wardrobe to fit the mold. Roan creates performance-driven clothing for your active lifestyle. Each piece is designed for versatility and made with integrity to outfit you for an active life lived on your own terms. The Roan promise is to help you move forever forward. Use code MILE40 for 20% off online and in-store for new customers only. Visit www.rhone.com, that's Rhone spelled RHONE, or find your local store and move forever forward starting today. I agree with you 100%. And, I kind of got some goosebumps hearing you say that, because in my personal life, I do know a lot of people who I feel on the surface have a lot, but you know, I see the search for happiness, really really trouble them, and it's a testimony to the fact that materialistic possessions and wealth and money don't necessarily solve um, you know all the issues that life will throw your way. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And um, this is about the third time that I've said foundation on this podcast, because I think foundation, when I think about how you must have witnessed your father not only handle your mother's death, but then take on what's the age difference between you and your brother, and who's the older?
My brother's 2 years younger than I am.
Yeah, so you have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and you're a single dad. I'm a father. I have a 2-year-old. I have one on the way. Um, I and you're a father, and I'm sure you'd agree with me. I have no idea what I would do without my wife. And so, and as an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, I'm not sure you really process or fully understand, what your dad is about to undertake now. And so not only does he have to execute, on the day to day of, just making sure that you stay alive, you're healthy, you're fed and all that, but now he's got to, make sure that you're taken care of emotionally, which I think arguably is probably harder, than, taking care of the basic needs, and making sure that you're emotionally set up for success. And that is not just, in terms of like, relationships at school and teachers, but also future success. Like, you're married now, but I do feel like the bond between a mother and a son impacts ultimately, the future relationship between a son and his wife, and that relationship. Um, and so, is your father still alive?
Yes, he is 81 years old, and he's my hero and always will be. And, I tell people I didn't get to know my mom because she died when I was young, and that was rather tragic. But I got uh, a dad who was twice the dad that most dads will ever be. So I had yes, it was tragic. Yes, I lost my mother. I still feel that today. I mean, on Mother's Day, I don't have a mother to call and haven't had one for almost 40 years now, I guess. On Parents Weekend in college, when all the boys were getting red roses pinned on their uniforms, I had a friend's mom pin a white rose on my uniform, and I was one of the only ones. And so, sure, it impacts you, but there's always positives to all this stuff. Like, as I get older, I look back on the so-called bad things that have happened in my life, and man, every single bad thing, Bashoy, that's happened in my life, when I look back on it, turned out to be a good thing at the end of the day. And my mother's death was, in some respects, what made me who I am. It made my brother who I am, and it made my dad who he was. And so there's good in all of that stuff. But I'll tell you, like when you see your father, and at the end of my dad's military career, he was in charge of nuclear warheads. He had a very important top secret job, and literally he could be called. It was called being on alert. He got a phone call, and he's got whatever. Doesn't matter what he's doing. He's got to be in his B-52 in the air in like 30 minutes, no matter what he was doing. But guess what? He missed one basketball game my entire high school career. Why? How was he able to do that, Bashoy? How were you able to do that, Colonel Beckham? You know how he was able to do it? because he made it a priority. That's how he was able to do it. And that's one of the lessons he taught me. So, when I'm sitting there at the office at 6 and one of my kids has a sporting event and I could skip it, make up an excuse about work, I just think about what my dad did and I make it a priority. When somebody invites me to a business dinner and it's potentially something that might be, good for the business in whatever respect. If my kids have something that I've committed to, it's an easy answer, and the answer is no. I got a priority, and that's not anything special. It's just like living the example that my dad lived for me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's really wonderful to hear you say that, and I think it's something that a lot of people, um, need to hear, and I mean that in a way where it's just reflective because a lot of people haven't experienced loss. A lot of people think about it, but they haven't experienced it, and they think about what they would do if they did experience it. And this is just a reminder to not take things for granted, whether it's your kids, your loved one, whoever it is, to make sure not to take things for granted. And um, this is really, really just very special and insightful, and I'm grateful that you're really
Do you think
opening up about it.
you think Elon Musk is happy? Richest guy on the planet. You think he's a
No,
happy guy? I mean, that guy has 10. He doesn't even know his kids. I mean, yeah, he's got a lot of money. Yeah, he's famous, but he doesn't seem very happy to me.
I don't think he's happy, but I also am not sure he's human. So uh, yeah,
Oh boy.
yeah,
We should have a
yeah.
philosophical conversation about consciousness, AI, computer science, all that stuff. That's what we should talk about.
No, I would love that. My father's a big fan of philosophy, and so when I read your profile, that was one of the things that really popped in my head. And now that I've gotten to know you a little bit more over these last 30 minutes, um, I can only imagine the things that you've been thinking about from a philosophical approach before you ever approached philosophy as a subject. And so I'm sure there were thoughts of, you know, just breaking down the purpose of existence and breaking down, what your purpose is and, what the purposes of humanity is to that note and why, bad things happen to good people. I'm sure all those thoughts at one point had run through your head. And so, why don't we segue into that a little bit? Because I'm sure philosophy was foundational for your journey into law, as it is for a lot of people. And so, what sparked the initial interest in philosophy as a subject?
Yeah, good, great question. So I go to college. I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I played basketball at Texas A&M my first year. That's all. I was a jock. That's what I was interested in. This is in the early '90s. This is kind of on the cutting edge of the computer internet revolution. I like computers. I started messing around with them. I was like, oh, I'll just major in computer science. And I didn't realize that you had to do four different calculator classes, linear algebra, differential equations, you name, I mean, all this super complex math. I kind of struggled with that a little bit, but I was able to get through. But every single computer science major at my school was required to have a minor. And what most would do is electrical engineering or physics or mathematics or something like that. And I said, can I choose anything I want? Yeah. And I had taken a couple intro to philosophy courses. And so I decided to take another degree in philosophy. And I think what piqued my interest at the time was I took a philosophy, it was philosophy 240, symbolic logic. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like this, if you want to learn how to think and reason clearly, logic is so powerful. And I had never heard of it before. I'd never heard of like formalized logical systems. And I got a huge kick out. To me, it was like puzzles. It's like solving puzzles. And the older I get, and the other thing people ask me oftentimes, by the way, Bishoy, is computer science and philosophy. That's kind of a strange mix. And interestingly, historically, the original computer scientists were philosophers. And you go back even further, the original scientists were philosophers. They called, matter of fact, philosophy or science was called, science back then was called natural philosophy. That's what, when Newton was around, he was a natural philosopher. He was not a mathematician or a physicist. And I think philosophy actually is more fundamental than science. I think the philosophers are the ones who ask the questions, and then the scientists are the ones who answer them. And without the questions, you don't have the answer. You got to ask the right questions. And so I've always been deeply, deeply interested. The point is there are a lot of connections between computer science, physics, mathematics, and philosophy. I think they're all part of the same thing, basically. And then when you branch that into law, so one of my focuses in philosophy was ethics and morals. I was very interested in different ways of living a good life, like John Stuart Mill and the classic utilitarianism or consequentialism. Immanuel Kant had a little different view of things. Jean-Paul Sartre had a different view of things. Friedrich Nietzsche had a little bit different view. There was the American pragmatic philosophers that I kind of was attracted to, but the point is I think it's all part of the same thing. And the ethical piece of it, what is law? Law is a society's statement of its collective ethics. Like, that's what law is. So law is me saying, Bashoy, in our society, you can't murder somebody unless you're doing it in self-defense or something like that. You can't, Bashoy, you can't come over in Texas and step foot on my property. You know why? Because if you step foot on my property, I'm allowed to shoot you dead. Whereas in other states, you can't use deadly force to protect your property. You can only use it to protect your body or somebody else's body. So law is philosophy. Law is our values in the real world. And so to me, all of these things are very, very interconnected. And the amazing thing, and it's pure luck that it worked out this way. But now that you have artificial intelligence, you have large language models, you have these different approaches to consciousness and things like that. All these things, philosophy, computer science, all these things are kind of converging. And so, for example, Elon Musk may be the world's best builder of robot cars, or he may be able to purchase a company like Neuralink that puts implants in people's brains. But you know what? Elon Musk doesn't know a damn bit more about the ethics of that than you or I do. And so a lot of these technology questions, we're allowing people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk to make non-technical decisions that affect everybody. They're making moral decisions that affect everybody, and they don't have any more knowledge of that. As a matter of fact, in some ways, they have less knowledge of that than a trained philosopher. And so, I get to view a lot of these tech issues nowadays from a slightly different perspective. So I not only I'm interested, for example, in large language models and how to program those from the bottom up. And large language models are essentially nothing more than prediction and statistics, and there's a little bit of mathematics built in, but they're just kind of like prediction machines, and there's no ethics built into them, right? The ethics has to be put on top of them, and not many people are trained to do that, although a lot of our engineers pretend like they are. The engineers can tell you how to build the bridge, but they can't tell you whether you should build the bridge, if that makes sense.
But I mean, um, is there a common code of ethics that exists for these LLMs? Essentially, is the question,
No,
right? Like,
there's not.
no, right?
Yeah,
And
there's
so, like,
not.
there isn't, and then that's one of the things that even now, and I don't even want to call this the early stages because it's not really the early stages anymore of the rise of AI. you know, People are looking for, this is bent toward the left or this is bent toward the right, or something to call out foul in the implementation of, if you want to call it ethics or philosophical standards, if you will. You know, and so that's a really good call out. So what kind of law specifically are you doing?
I do the most moral law there is. I take people that have very little money and very little power, typically, who have been injured or killed by entities that have a lot of power and a lot of money, and I get them justice, essentially. So people call that a trial lawyer, whatever you want to call it, but I fight for people's rights when they're being trampled, and it's not a coincidence I'm doing this. When my mother was the victim of some very, very bad medical malpractice. She was misdiagnosed over the course of 2 years. She was a nurse, Air Force nurse, and felt lumps in her breast and went to the doctor over the course of 2 years, and he blew her off for 2 years. Never got a mammogram, never got it tested. By the time they tested it, it was way too late. And my dad hired a lawyer to sue the United States government and won, which is almost impossible. Your listeners can look up the case, Beckcom versus the United States. And I think subconsciously, when I went to law school, that was in the back of my mind. And so now I do for families what that lawyer did for my family, basically.
Was that the when you were in law school, getting out of law school? I mean, you had mentioned this earlier. Did you took that job for 6 to 8 months? The high paying
Yeah,
150K job. Was that corporate law, or what were you doing at that point?
I was doing basically I was defending the corporations that I sue now. And I
Got it.
remember I had this case a year in. I represented a big plumbing company, and one of their black plumbers, a guy named Eric LeGrone, fell off a roof and got hurt very badly. We went to court. I lost that case. I remember giving Mr. LeGrone the check, and I was thinking in the back of my mind, I'm glad I'm giving this to him. I like this guy. I
Yeah,
like this guy more than I like my client. And then I thought,
yeah.
oh shit, I'm on the wrong side of this. So I jumped,
I love that.
I jumped to the other side fairly quickly. But it was a good experience. I met a lot of great people at that law firm. I learned how billion-dollar insurance companies defend lawsuits, and now I use that for my clients' benefit.
I love how transparent you were about that sentiment. As you were handing him the check, and because not a lot of people, granted, I'm sure that was a long time ago now, but not a lot of people struggle with that moment. A lot of people struggle with that moment, with admitting, how they really feel, especially when, they're on the side of bigger money or, the corporate protection. And so it's really eye opening, and it says a lot about you, as a human, in a good way, obviously. I think that, my second book was called Audacious: Uncaging Your Authentic Self. And the whole premise of that book was to um, dive into the mindset of doing, the thing that's a little bit less popular, but for the better good. And so, I talk about the characteristics that one would need to employ to accomplish, those audacious tasks. And I wouldn't necessarily characterize, your transition from one side of law to the other as a goal, as more so just, you following your authentic self and what your head was telling you on the inside. And so I think that that's a real testimony to it can be done, right? Like
Yeah, sure.
you can, you can follow your heart in those instances and still come out and be okay. Um, and so I think that's awesome. Um, Really quick with regards to your athletic background, you mentioned you're a D1 athlete, played basketball at Texas A&M. I imagine you were in shape most of your younger life. Did you continue playing post college, or how has fitness played a role with regards to just your overall well being since then? Fitness is obviously a big piece of this show, and given everything that you've gone in your life, obviously you talk about jujitsu and that being a big element of your life. Talk to me about your fitness journey a little bit.
Yeah, so I've been an athlete my entire life. Like I said, I'm 51 today. I still consider myself an athlete. Um, I played basketball until I was about 35. Then I retired. Never had any major injuries. I was like, man, I got super lucky. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to pick up golf. I'll be a scratch golfer in 4 years. I'm a really good athlete. That has not happened. I have gotten down to a four handicap. So I've gotten pretty good, but I found Brazilian Jiu Jitsu 4 years ago. And it's the best thing I've done in the last 15 years by far for a lot of different reasons. But that's my current sport. So I'm a purple belt. I've competed in tournaments. I train 5 days a week. I train against 30-year-old Brazilian black belts. I train against 50-year-old dads, everything in between. And it's freaking awesome. It is so awesome. And there's all these different jokes about jujitsu. People will talk your ear off and that's all they want to talk about. And da 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 da. And I'm certainly guilty of that. And we could talk about jujitsu for an hour, but if anybody listening right now is considering trying jujitsu, here's my advice: go do it. Do not wait. Go do it immediately. A lot of people don't take to it for various reasons, but the people that take to it are completely and totally addicted. And if you get at the right gym, you're going to get around a group of people that you're absolutely going to love for the rest of your life.
It's interesting. The people that I know that compete in jujitsu are some of the people that I respect, the most from an athletic standpoint. Um, and um, one of the things that I can say about all of them is that they're all pretty quiet souls, actually. They're really centered people who, you know, they don't brag, they're not bodacious, they everyone knows they're in incredible shape, but they'll never tell you that they're in incredible shape. You'll never have to hear them talk about, how good of shape that they're in. Um, and there's something really humbling, or I should say, they project a lot of humility in a very positive way. Um, can you speak to the benefit of jujitsu outside of the physical element of it? Because I don't. I think there's a reason why they're all like that. I have to imagine there's a discipline there that's being employed, and I'm sure there are a lot of listeners here that kind of have an idea of what jujitsu is, but don't really know, what it is in practice.
Jiu-jitsu is martial arts that works in real life. And I think one of the reasons the phenomena you're describing, Bashoy, this kind of quiet calmness or whatever, is because, especially for men, especially type A men, you walk into a group with a bunch of men, there's just this natural competitiveness. It's not, oh, what would happen if this guy, blah, blah, blah. You're always thinking about that, especially as a guy. When you do jujitsu, when I walk into a room, I know for a fact that there's not a single person in that room that could beat me up unless they're trained also. Uh, and the reason I know that is because I do it every day, like real situations. And I've seen it again and again and again and again. I mean, I had a 6'11", 28-year-old European basketball player walk into the gym about a month ago, and I'm 51 years old and I'm 6'1", and he had no chance against me, like zero chance. And so when you first start, quite frankly, you start looking around thinking about, oh man, what would I'd choke that guy, give that guy an arm bar. You do think about those things, but after a little while, you just don't worry about it anymore. There's this, just kind of this calmness and this, I don't know this. I don't know if confidence is the right. Kind of this relaxed feeling. But the other thing about jujitsu that I love for your listeners that are very kind of intellectual and introspective, and their minds tend to move a lot, is an activity like golf or fly fishing or painting or things where you're not turning your mind completely off, but you're using a completely different part of your mind. So it's like an active relaxation. So when you're fishing with a fly rod and you're studying the river and picking the flies and trying to see the fish, you're still thinking, but it's a different part of your brain. And so it takes that part of your brain, Bashoy, that you use to write your books and to run your companies offline for a little bit. I'm sure it's the same for people that do things like CrossFit or people that windsurf or, my best friend lives in Manhattan Beach and he surfs every day. It's kind of the same thing. You still have to think about what you're doing, but it's a different kind of thinking. And so, man, I tell you, I walk out of jiu-jitsu. It doesn't matter how bad I felt walking in. I always feel better walking out, mentally and physically.
You had mentioned before we got on the show that, um, with everything you have going on, um, you you wouldn't know what to do if you didn't have that mental stimulation, if you didn't have that thing to focus on or that interest to drive forward. Um, and you're still at it as we're at you're 51. I mean, you're not old, but you're not young either, right? And so you're right there in the middle. And I think that just listening to you speak and listening to you continue to find the beauty in all these different facets of life is just particularly special, because there are a lot of people younger than you that are seeking, the one or the two things to cling on to. And so, can you speak to the value of having these different interests and these different elements of your life that drive you forward, especially given that you have family of your own, you have kids of your own that you're setting an example for, and who you're, passing on these values to.
Yeah. So, you said something earlier in the conversation about people searching for happiness sometimes don't find it. Paradoxically, if you focus on finding happiness, you will be unhappy. I'm here to tell everybody that do not seek happiness. That is a recipe for unhappiness, for sure. So the question is, what do you seek? And, we can get as deep as you want on this. What's the meaning of life? I don't know what the meaning of life is. What should you seek? I don't know what you should seek, but you should seek something. You must have a purpose. And that purpose must be something that's your purpose, not other people's purpose. So if you want to be happy, don't seek happiness, seek meaning. Like what is the meaning in your life that's important? And here's the other thing that I'm here to tell everybody, and I didn't realize this until about 5 years ago. If you try to make other people happy, you will make yourself happy. If you try to make yourself happy, you will make yourself miserable. Okay. So in almost a guaranteed way to be happier is to help other people. Give them compliments. I mean, you don't have to give them money or time. Just say something nice. I really like your hair. You look that dress is so beautiful on you. It can be little small things. And so don't search for happiness. Search for purpose and search for meaning. And I don't know what the purpose of life or the meaning of life is, but right now, here's where my brain is, Bashoy. And I'm telling my kids this. The purpose in life for me right now is to maximize the talents that I've been given. And I don't know if that's the right purpose or not, but it seems to me like that's a pretty good guiding star. So I want to, when I'm dead, I don't want people to say he had the nicest cars, the nicest suits, and drank the best wine. When I die, I want to say this is what this guy did for other people. Like that's he really did the best he could to make the world just a little bit better place. And that's a little paradoxical, people want to be happy, and so what do? They pursue happiness, and what happens? They become unhappy, and that's just a bad path. And I'm telling everybody, there's not many things I'm sure of. That I'm sure of. Seeking happiness is a bad path. You have to seek something else. And what that other thing is, and I'm sure of this too, is meaning. You have to pursue meaning. You know what the opposite of happiness is, Bishoy? It's not unhappiness. The opposite of happiness is boredom. That's the opposite of happiness. And all boredom means is you don't have anything that gives you any meaning. I read this great book by a Dutch philosopher during quarantine. I think it's called My Life, if I remember it correctly. But basically, one of the premises was it would living forever, like a lot of these tech people are kind of focused on now, is literally would be the worst possible thing that could happen to a human being. Immortality would be torture. It would be a living hell. Why? Because you would have no reason to do anything. I could just wait for 10,000 years to do that. Your life, if you were immortal, your life would be completely devoid of meaning, which is the most important thing in the world. And so, if your listeners are going to remember anything I said today, I think that the two things I would urge, or actually the three things that I would want to leave them with is seeking happiness is a recipe for unhappiness. Seeking meaning or purpose is a better route. And the meaning or purpose has to be focused on somebody other than yourself.
Brian, I could do a whole podcast episode just on your last answer. And also you completely lawyered us with that closing, the way that you broke it down to those 3 points. That was the
I can't
perfect way
help
to
it.
close.
Rule
Someone
of
can tell,
three. Rule of three.
yeah, exactly. We can tell that you've presented before, and but you lawyered us in the best way possible. And I just want to say thank you for coming on. And to my point earlier, look, I did not expect the conversation to go the way that it went. And for the listeners out there, all I had was the bio before this. I didn't have insight into Brian's family life. I did not know about Brian's experience with his mother and the fact that his father was a single dad and that he raised him and his brother. And you talk about that search for meaning and purpose. And I think it all ties back to what you saw your father give to you and your brother, and how you're now giving that back, not just to your kids, but to your clients and the people that you encounter in your daily life. And, it's this beautiful circle of paying it forward that, unbeknownst to you at the time as a child, was founded in your mother's pain and suffering. She laid the groundwork for a lot of the good things and a lot of the things that you're doing now. And so I just want to say thank you again. And I really appreciate it.
Appreciate being on the show. I have one question for you, Bishoy.
Absolutely.
Would you be willing to come on my show? I'd like this conversation so much. I'd love to have you as a guest on my show.
100%. We will definitely be setting that up. I'd be honored to be on your show.
Let's do it, man. I'm looking forward to it.
You got it.